and welcome to the Is It Just Me podcast with Jess and Luke, the show dedicated to diving into your F1 opinions. Now, we're not in the studio this week because mainly it's my fault. I've decided to work from Italy rather than work from home, which means that we're not in the studio. It's just us in a box again, unfortunately, but that doesn't matter because we've got a spicy topic this week, haven't we, Luke? And
we do.
It's gonna hopefully provide tons of entertainment. Kind of a bit of a disclaimer, Tifosi. Tifosi might love this episode, or they're going to hate it. I think we're not going to really have anywhere in the middle, really. What do you think?
That's good. Yeah, but that's what this show's about, isn't it? It's about polarizing opinions and getting people, I guess, worked up and getting passionate about their F1 views. And I think this topic this week, it's such an important one. It is the talking point in Formula One right now, I believe. And I think we've had some really great submissions as well in the voice notes. So it's a lot to get into today.
So if you haven't already guessed, this episode, shock, is about Ferrari. Now, they've made one of their, if not the worst start to a Formula One season in a long, long time. We're not used to seeing them as far back as this. They're fifth in the Constructors' Championship. And I don't know about you, Luke, but watching them around Spa last weekend, especially considering the fact that they had won in quite emotional style the year before in 2019 when Leclerc took his win there. It was just kind of, oh, how the mighty have fallen. And not only that, not only did they not win, they actually didn't score any points at all, which is just, I don't know. I don't actually know how Ferrari fans are coping with this season because it must just be such a punch in the gut.
It really must be. And I think off the back of two strong seasons in 3 strong seasons, 17, 18, 19, where Ferrari was winning races and sort of looking like it was getting maybe a little bit closer back to its glory days again, to have this just massive come down. I mean, that's to not be fighting for winning races. I mean, that's difficult enough for Ferrari because it's Ferrari. Like, it's meant to be fighting at the very front. But to not even score any points, and not even that, but to not even get close to scoring any points. Those cars spent 5 laps in the top 10 last week. 5. And that is literally it. And that was all on Charles Leclerc, who made a great start to get up to 8. And then he was overtaken by 4 cars in 5 laps or something like that. And he said that even with DRS open on the main straight, he couldn't keep up with some of the cars because Ferrari's engine deficit, as we're going to get into later in the show, is just so big right now. So yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture for Ferrari right now. And as you say, the Tifosi must really be sort of thinking, well, like, yikes, like what's got to change for not only for this long running title drought to end, but also for Ferrari to even look like it could get a podium on merit or win races once again.
Now, the rhetoric coming out of Ferrari is that, we're not at crisis, we are managing the situation, but obviously from outside perspective, we want to place blame somewhere, right? Like we need to know what is going on. And I think after last weekend, going through Twitter, there were more and more voices calling for Binotto's head and placing the buck at his feet. So this week's opinion, again, shockingly, you're probably surprised to say, is it just me? Or does Ferrari require a change at the top to become successful again? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Binotto in his self as an individual or as the team principal, but more so, I guess, across Ferrari's top management. What needs to happen at Ferrari in order to have them winning races again? But let's hear from Francesco to start off with, because I think he is representing a lot of very upset Tifosi at the moment.
If you want to lay off Ferrari for good, then they need some big change at the top with, Binotto out as all the Tifosi want. If you want something that works, you need some big cultural change in the working culture at Ferrari, because the one they have right now where everyone gets blamed for each and every little single minuscule detail or mistake that there is just isn't working for them. It hasn't worked for them for decades now. So I guess they need to switch that into a more, Mercedes approach with their non-blame culture, which is evidently working wonders.
So making a comparison to Mercedes there, which I guess on the other side of the success scale, they do seem to have a very cohesive, very uniform, I guess you would say potentially a Germanic approach to the way that they run that team. Everybody knows what they're there to do. Everybody knows who's the boss. And although maybe unlike historic Ferrari, they don't have out and out driver rankings, or they don't have a number one driver or number two driver, and they don't really like to play around with team orders. Where they've needed to use it, they've used it, and it's really, really working out for them. Probably the understatement of the century. But there does seem to be a bit of a period of pain that Ferrari has gone through, that's meant that they've kind of come close, as we saw kind of in 2017, 18. They were competitive. At 2019, they were still competitive. They were winning races, and although maybe they didn't take it quite as close to Mercedes as they had done in the previous two seasons, it was still, you believe that they were capable of at least challenging them on the tracks where Mercedes maybe weren't so successful. But let's just shall we recap on what's gone wrong at Ferrari? Now, obviously, we talked about the fact that they had a really, really poor Belgium, and they've had a pretty poor start to the season. But where, Luke, do you think, can we trace this back to the beginning of 2019?
Well, I think you could arguably go even further back than that. I mean, we're looking at 2007 was the last Drivers' Championship win with Kimi Räikkönen, 2008 the last Constructors' Championship win, and since then, I think, as you say, it's kind of been a lot of getting very close, but not quite getting over the line to win a title. We saw that with Fernando Alonso during his time there. Very pained period, I think, for Alonso. He was seen as the man who could really bring success back to Maranello. Came close in 2010, came close in 2012, fell out with the team, left at the end of 2014. In comes Sebastian Vettel. He's seen as the same kind of figure. He can rally people around him. He can get the team built around him, a bit like Michael Schumacher did. It was a period of change. Maurizio Arrivabene came in as team principal at the beginning of 2015 as well. And it seemed like a very sort of new Ferrari that was coming in. And again, Vettel got close in 17 and 18 especially, but not quite over the line and not quite there. So Ferrari, again, make changes. We saw Charles Leclerc come in. We saw Mattia Binotto come in. But they now have just taken such a huge step back. It's very, very difficult to see quite how they're going to turn things around very quickly. And I think with regards to sort of the 2019 period and how things have changed, looking at this year especially, there are two fundamental big issues right now for Ferrari. Is firstly the chassis. Is the SF1000 car is a fundamentally flawed car. It's a car that the drivers have said it's too draggy, but it also doesn't offer enough downforce. So it's kind of like the worst of both worlds, basically. It's just not good for anybody. And at a track like Spa, where you kind of say, well, we're either going to have one or the other, they had neither. So that explained a lot of why they were struggling as much as they were. And then the other big issue that I think has really been the talking point in F1 for a good sort of year or so now, I would say, is Ferrari's engine. And it is just clearly so far down on power compared to not only to the rest of the grid, but also to what it was last year. And Ferrari, if you remember last year, they had by far the strongest power unit. They were very, very strong. Tracks like Spa, Monza, they really, really were able to look like the strongest team and dominate to a certain degree, purely because that power unit was putting out so much strength, and it was really hard for everyone else to catch up. But then that's when some suspicions started to arise about just how strong Ferrari were doing and how much they were performing, particularly when you saw races, I think, such as Austin and Abu Dhabi, where they all of a sudden just dropped off a cliff. They went from being up there with Mercedes to clearly the third fastest team, not a hope in hell of catching either Mercedes or Red Bull. And it again started to sort of fuel some suspicions about why Ferrari would have these massive swings in performance and what was going on. And then at the end of pre-season testing, literally an hour before on-track running finished in Barcelona, I think in a bid to try and bury it away, a bit of bad news just tucked away so we'd all miss it, the FIA announced that they come to a private settlement with Ferrari regarding its power unit usage from last year. And basically Ferrari had opened up its power unit and said to the FIA, look, here is what we were doing with our power unit, but the details have all remained private. And the FIA have said they'd be happy to release them, but Ferrari have blocked it. Ferrari say it's our intellectual property, therefore we don't want to give that away. But what it means is that we don't know fully what Ferrari did. And that, though, what the FIA then learned from that settlement led to a load of technical directives, which are basically information given to the team saying what you can and can't do with your cars, and I guess sort of little tweaks to the technical regulations. And a lot of that centered on the engines, and as a result, Ferrari have now had this massive drop off in engine performance this year, and that caused a load of issues, and that is a lot of why the team is struggling so much. That's why it's sort of 1.3 seconds per lap slower than it was a year ago, which when you spend so much money developing a new car, that's not how it works. Like, you get incrementally quicker, not that much slower. The Ferrari customer teams, Haas and Alfa Romeo, they're in a similarly sort of bad boat because they use those power units. And it's just a really bad situation right now for that team. And there is not really an overnight fix, particularly with the regulations set to be in place again next year and the cars carrying over. Ferrari are going to be in this pickle for quite a while, it would appear.
And a word that you repeated a lot there, Luke, was technical. Now, Mattia Binotto obviously was technical director before he became team principal. And recently, Toto Wolff has come out saying that it's maybe the decisions that have been made within the team from certain members of the team that have caused Ferrari's downfall. Now, he wouldn't say exactly who, and obviously we can only assume, but I guess my follow-up question to exactly what you've just said, if all these issues are technical issues, does the blame not lay at Binotto's feet?
I think that is what would happen in many other sports. I think in football especially, I think if a team underperforms, then the manager is the one who is ultimately held accountable and ultimately pays the price for that. And I think that Ferrari, they've battered away ideas of needing a change or anything like that, and they've said, look, we're all in this together, like nobody's to blame. And that even goes to the on-track stuff, like even when Leclerc clearly biffed into the rear of Vettel at the start of the second Austria race, Ferrari went, we're not going to place blame, like there's no responsibility or anything like that. And it's because that is kind of the line that they're taking right now, that they ultimately, there's no point pointing fingers, like we may as well just all kind of work together and get on with it. And the only way we're going to get out of this hole is if we all work together, not by placing blame or blaming anybody for it. But I think that Binotto, I think, is, as the technical chief in many ways, because for a while he was dovetailing the sort of double duties across the technical director and team principal role, there a lot of that does come down to him. And I think that there's a lot of questions about Ferrari's technical team structure. They've said that they had a restructure recently, of course, but they still don't have a technical director. Like, they've got a head of vehicle performance, a head of performance development, something to that effect, but there is no outright technical director who's sort of like accountable for all of it. So that is where you kind of say, well, where does the blame lie? Like, who ultimately has got to sort of pay the price and answer the questions for the recent failings? A lot of that would point to Binotto, but as we're going to get into again, there are massive pros and cons that always come with any sort of position change or getting rid of someone, because it's not as easy as bringing someone new in and then immediately bringing success back.
And you mentioned the analogy of, like, in football, it's pretty much a given, right? I mean, I think it's even written in their contracts, isn't it, that a manager has to achieve a certain performance, either to get a bonus, or they just say we will get a team to this position in the championship, or we will win this many titles, etc., depending on whether you're a Premiership team or a high-flying team. And if they don't achieve that, then the board looks at it and goes, well, you're not hitting your KPIs, mate, off you go. and whilst I've always, it's a funny one, because I've always kind of struggled with that approach to things, because I'm also like, but it's a team, and it might be down to a player's performance or whatever. But actually, when you look into it more and more, and I guess you get a better understanding, because I will admit, I'm not a die-hard football fan, so I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective. But I've always thought, yeah, but what do you achieve by getting rid of the manager? Surely you need to look at it more holistically, because there's not just one person involved. But I guess as the manager, as the leader, it is your job to fix those issues. So if certain players aren't performing, how do we make sure that they are? Do they need more training? Or if they're not gelling correctly, then it has to be to do with the culture that you're applying, or like, I guess maybe not punishing those that aren't playing ball. Sorry, extremely bad pun. I genuinely didn't even mean that one. But yeah, it is their ultimate responsibility as the manager, as the leader. And I think we were talking about it just before we came on to record this. Again, this is probably like a really old example, and anybody that's listening that's also a football fan is going to be like, could you not think of a more recent example? But the one that sticks out in my mind is when Sir Alex Ferguson left Man United and the team just seemed to drop off a cliff. And I guess that was to do with the fact that the culture changed and the approach changed. And, they went through a lot of managers on their way to kind of find any kind of stability and what maybe some would say better success. And I guess that's what Ferrari has similarly had. They've gone through a lot of team principles in a relatively short amount of time, which we might touch on a little bit as we get through some fan opinions, because I'm conscious that you and I, Luke, have been chatting on, and we've not been throwing it back over to the fans, which obviously ultimately this podcast is about. But let's just, before we briefly go on to Mike's audio, who brings up the maybe the argument that there needs to be a culture change. There has been one, hasn't there, since Binotto has joined? And I guess what he was aiming to achieve by becoming team principal is a very, very different Ferrari. I guess in the past, and I'm not sure they've quite achieved or gotten over this little hurdle just yet, it's a hugely political team. It's run by its politics, its tradition, its Ferrari way of doing things, which I think is one of the reasons why it is so valued and so has such a massive following, because it's Ferrari. It's got such values that are instantly recognizable, and I think some work for them and others maybe work against them, and I'm not quite sure which exactly, but and maybe we don't want to go into too much into this podcast about what we personally think of Ferrari politics, but it's something that I think we all, when we look at the likes of Jean Todt and Ross Brawn, when they came in and started working with Schumacher, it was very much an approach where they were like, no, we're going to handle this Italian politics and way of doing things and actually mold that and change that in order to produce a highly, highly successful team. And that's arguably when Ferrari was at its peak. So in terms of when Binotto started in 2019, I guess that's when he started the Essere Ferrari campaign and wanted a very, very open, very honest Ferrari, which is maybe something, they've always been very private and, very, closed off and you don't get to see behind the scenes, and you don't, the drivers will act as superheroes and you don't get to see their personalities maybe as much. And that's all that has changed. And I think, would you agree, Luke? Like how has it been obviously working with teams? How did you notice an initial switch in 2019?
Initially, yeah, definitely. And that is, you mentioned the Essere Ferrari. Your pronunciation was much better than mine.
It's only because I'm in Italy and I'm
exactly,
I'm just absorbing the culture.
It's good. And it's that, but that's something that you see all these sort of media campaigns. And I guess Williams had their We Are Racing, McLaren have Fearlessly Forward or whatever. But Ferrari made clear that the idea of Essere Ferrari, that was not just a hashtag. Like, they wanted it to be the actual sort of mindset of the team moving forward. And we actually had a dinner for journalists in early 2019, just after Binotto took over, and he was there along with a lot of other sort of notable Ferrari people, and he said to all of us, I want us to be more open and like more sort of accessible, and I guess more Essere Ferrari than we have been in the past. Like, we want to show that we're together, we want to show that you guys, like, as journalists, like, you're important, and basically we want to work with you. And there has definitely been a shift at Ferrari. Like, it is definitely a little bit more open, a little bit more friendly, I think, than it's perhaps been in the past. And I think that is I think credit has to go to the team for doing that, and that is a really, really cool thing. But it is, I think there is that question of like, how far does that go? And ultimately it can only go, the idea of sort of being of that openness, and I guess sort of happy to sort of, I guess, break down some of the walls at Maranello, perhaps. That's all very well and good when you're winning. Like, and I think Mercedes is proof of that. Like, they've got a very strong team culture. They're very open about sort of how they have a no blame culture and things like that, as we will get into. But I think when you're winning, it's very, very easy to do that. And when you're not, like, you kind of start to think, oh, well, actually, is someone to blame? Like, are we really all together in this? Like, is someone letting the side down or whatever? And that, I think, it's natural that kind of doubt would perhaps seep in a little bit and perhaps break down some of that sort of Essere Ferrari idea and culture. And I think we saw the most clear breakdown of that last year in Brazil when Leclerc and Vettel collided. And I think that was just very clearly showing that this is not a team that has got everything together and is completely all on the same page in terms of what they're doing and everything like that, because that was just a total embarrassment for Ferrari, that it went from sort of thinking like, well, we could maybe fight for some, like, at least a podium here, see how we can sort of get at the front with Red Bull and Mercedes, to both cars crashing out of the race like in the closing stages. And that as a team is like the ultimate like no, like you just do not do that. You do not have your cars crash into each other, and it should be very clear from the word go like why you do not do that and what the repercussions are of that. So I think that go on.
No, finish your point, Luke. Sorry, I thought you were done, but you just stopped for breath.
Sorry, but I think that culture is something Ferrari have been trying to change, but I'm not sure how far that has gone, and particularly now they're in a time of crisis. And I don't care what they say, but Matteo Binotto said they're in the middle of a storm. It's not a crisis. This is a crisis. Like, if you're a team of Ferrari with your team spending 5 laps inside the points, that is a crisis. Then I think you do have to kind of look at the decisions that have been made and say, look, is our mentality the right one, or is the mentality correct and we've got to change other aspects, or what? And I think that's something that they really need to sort of dig deep and work out what they're doing.
So let's hear from Mike, because I think he raises a lot of the points that you've just kind of touched on in bullets, but let's hear what Mike thinks.
Yes, they definitely need a change at the top. The lack of communication and the lack of leadership is showing week in and week out, with a lack of strategy, a lack of preparation, and a team that looks like they're floundering. A team like Ferrari shouldn't take many years to overcome this. They should figure out a solution to crawl back year by year, and it just feels like from the top there is just absolutely no leadership.
Some pretty damning comments there from Mike, but I guess I think I don't quite totally agree with what Mike's saying, but I do understand where maybe it's coming from. I think they did going back to Essere Ferrari, like they were saying that they wanted an openness and they didn't want to have this politics that they've maybe been known for in the past, but actually they then didn't really know how to operate under that culture. They made silly mistakes. They sent really confusing messages to the drivers during races. You know, they said that they'd had talks prior to races, and then when the race played out and it didn't quite go the way that they wanted, they then didn't do what they promised to the drivers. I can't remember which race it was where I think Vettel got the jump on Charles, and Charles was like, that was Russia. Yeah, okay. I thought it might have been Russia, but I wasn't too sure. So thank you for that, Luke, your encyclopedia. So and the messages coming back and forth to the pit wall were some of just utter confusion. And although maybe you might point again to Russia, and when Valtteri got the now infamous Valtteri it's James call, at least that was very much like, no, this is what's going on, and we're going to be unapologetic, and we are doing this. This is team orders. They're not illegal anymore. We can do this. But it was very much like Ferrari were like, oh no, but we can't do that because that's old Ferrari and we're new Ferrari. But it just meant that it was all over the place. They made some poor strategy calls last year that lost them a lot of races, I probably would argue, or at least a handful potentially. And it just seems that like it's all very well and good saying, oh, but we're this new lovely cuddly Ferrari, and we don't have favorites and we don't have team orders and everything's just going to play out nicely. But if it's not working, you can't go down that route anymore, or you at least need to absolutely have nailed this year what the issue is. And I guess the problem that they've now got is not only are they trying to fix that, they're also trying to fix a dog of a car. It's kind of, but I guess the fact that maybe this hasn't, and I guess a lot of people are very upset about, is the communication, especially around the unceremonious booting of Vettel, who was meant to be their, prodigal son, returned to Ferrari in order to make it great again. And I think like the fact that there was just, Vettel coming out and saying, I had absolutely no idea. I was completely blindsided. And obviously there's certain things that Binotto have said that maybe people haven't been very like, how can you do this to a 4-time world champion and just have no communication there whatsoever? What are you doing? Like what is going on here? Like how can there be this much uncertainty and just like complete confusion in a team that's meant to be totally open, totally honest? It's just to me, it's not what they're saying and what they're doing is not meshing at all.
Definitely, and I think that's very fair. And I think you're correct in the highlighting Vettel's exit from the team, because Ferrari announced that in a press release saying, it's been jointly decided between the driver and the team that we're not going to look at contract talks. And it took, because of the pandemic, it took a good couple of months till we actually got to speak to Sebastian Vettel and him say, no, I didn't receive an offer. I got a call and said, we don't need your services. We're not going to look at renewing contract talks for next year. And it took him completely by surprise. And again, like if a team is completely open and everybody is on the same page, then surely there should be that sort of two-way communication where Ferrari is sort of saying, look, we're sort of weighing up our options, or Vettel saying, look, like tell me what's going on. Like I want to be here next year. But I think that even extends to the strategy calls that we've seen in recent times, as Mike touched on in his audio clip. Like the communication has just been awful. Like you've had the drivers actively going over the radio saying like, well, what is going on with my strategy? And Vettel, Spain, I think, was the highlight where he basically made his own strategy. He pulled off an absolute blinder of a call to one stop, get those soft tyres to the end and finish 7th, when really he should have finished 12th. But he did it all himself because Ferrari was sort of like, oh no, we're going to pit you again. He starts pushing and then they go, actually, could you go to the end? And he was like, oh, for sake, like I asked you, like what am I doing here? And then had to actively like say, right, what times do I need to be going for? And it's that kind of thing where you're like, the pit wall should have that absolute confidence. And as you say with Mercedes, they're ruthless, but they're to the point. And they say to the drivers, look, Valtteri, it's James, move aside, we're concerned. Or as they did in Belgium, even at the last race, say to Bottas, you've got one overtake, but we've said we're not using it against Lewis, therefore you don't use it. And it is so clear and to the point and just like it's very black and white. Whereas with Ferrari, I think there's a lot of grey right now, and that is a big issue. But also I think you've got to question, like, would changing one person at the top really get rid of that, or is it more of a cultural thing? Like we've seen Mercedes, their no blame culture, like that is such a huge credit, I think, to the team that Toto Wolff has made there, because he takes a lot of his learnings from the All Blacks New Zealand rugby team. It's the idea of that you do everything for the shirt, for the team, and you want to create a sort of a dynasty that you can pass down through generations. And now, to me, no team sort of fits that better than Ferrari, because it is literally the red of Maranello. Like the drivers put on that race suit. Every team member wears that shirt and should do so. And I'm sure they do so with absolute pride, to know they are part of something that's much bigger than just an F1 team. But the culture around it, like that is something that you've got to kind of, I guess, sort of foster and you grow it. And it takes a while for that kind of to build up. But I think also it takes a while to undo it, which is what we've perhaps seen at Ferrari, that even with the idea of Essere Ferrari, that's not really been enough to undo some of the old stuff. But would really getting rid of one person, would that change that? Or is it going to take a much bigger sort of cultural shift? I'm not so sure.
So let's dive into that then, because I guess all of these, the arguments so far have been like why Binotto's maybe failed as the leader, but let's have a look at why he potentially should stay. And there's plenty of people that think he should stay. Let's kick off with Sean.
Hi guys, I don't think Mattia Binotto should be sacked from Ferrari. I think he's not a bad team principal for him. He's been there since '95. He knows the team very well and the philosophy of Ferrari. My only problem until recently, he was the technical director as well of Ferrari while being team principal. My opinion, that is too much on one person's shoulders. The pressure of Ferrari is already immensely great, and running an F1 team while designing an F1 car is just too much on that person. Also, how many team principals do Ferrari want to go through to make them go back at the front? Riva Benet, Domenicali, and Mattiacci. Maybe not in that order, but how many team principals do they need to go through really till they back at the front winning championships?
Two major points that Sean's bringing up there. The one being Binotto up until recently, and again, as you touched on a little bit before, Luke, it's not really totally fixed yet. He was doing the roles of two key members in a Formula One team, the team principal and the technical director. So the people management side and the design of your F1 car. I mean, I don't think there are two kind of more important, obviously the roles of a team, everybody plays their part, and obviously drivers, you need to kind of have some good drivers in there as well. But from a team perspective, one person doing both of those roles, I mean, just seems absolutely insane. I mean, I know we think Toto Wolff is a fantastic team principal, but there's no way in hell that he could manage the roles that he has as well as someone like a James Allison. Like there's just no way that those two roles could combine. So yeah, is that kind of maybe why? I guess it's like jack of all trades, master of none, right? If you have to dedicate 50% to a job that requires 100, there's no way you're going to be successful, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is definitely a concern, and I think that's why Ferrari have recently done their kind of technical restructuring, where they've got sort of a new system in place so that Binotto is purely focusing on being team principal. And I think that's a very important thing, because ultimately, as you said, like those are two very separate, very different jobs. And I think brilliant that you mentioned James Allison at Mercedes there, because he is an excellent technical director, ex-Ferrari of course, and he's someone that I think Ferrari has dearly missed, because you need someone who can just sort of go, right, my remit is to build a quick race car, and that is literally it, without engaging in all sort of the politics and I guess the other sort of F1 affairs that come with the day-to-day running of an F1 team. Because like Mercedes, that's Toto Wolff's job. Like he doesn't have any involvement in the design of that car. Like that is all on James Allison and his technical team. So I think that's an important change that Ferrari have made recently. But yeah, again, you've got to question, okay, well, how long will it take this sort of new technical team to gel working together to get used to sort of like this role, where before you've had, I guess, Binotto heading things up a little bit more? Because yeah, they are two huge jobs that really you can't put down to one person.
And so if we were going to assign him one role, because I guess maybe the argument is that he doesn't deserve to be sacked, but maybe he should go back to being technical director if that's what his area of expertise is in. I mean, he's been at the team, and a lot of people pointed this out, he's been at the team for 20 years. Like he's been there a long time. He knows Ferrari inside out. He believes in this new direction for Ferrari, but is it better that he went back to his technical director role? So rather than being sacked completely, I guess just reassigned.
I think I don't know if that's something Ferrari could do without losing a lot of face, because I think that would be a very sort of bold move to say that we're going to sort of pull you back down, I guess, to that sort of more technical role. And I think that he's got Lauren Meckies working with the team as well, who's ex-FIA and as the sporting director. And I think that is a very, very important role to have. And I guess sort of support all those sort of off-track and sort of less technical matters, which is very important. I think that Binotto, I mean, he proved through his time at Ferrari, he was a key part of that sort of early 2000s dream team with sort of Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, Jean Todt and all of that led Michael Schumacher to so much success. So there is, I think, sort of the idea of that he's clearly talented. Like he's clearly done a lot in Formula One, and he's clearly a very, very important part of Ferrari. And I've always been very impressed by what he's been able to do at the team there. So I think that there is definitely value to Binotto, like absolutely 100%. And at any point are we saying like, oh, that he's not good at his job or anything like that, because he is an excellent sort of member of that team from a technical point of view, especially his track record proves that. But you've got to question, does it really fit the same way now? Like of all sort of the members of the team who were there during that sort of Schumacher heyday, there aren't many left. Like you've got Rory Byrne is still sort of part of this technical setup, despite it being in sort of like mid to late 70s now, which again I find a strange sort of way to sort of claw back to the past. You got to say, but would it be better if Ferrari just had a complete clean sheet of paper and said, look, we're not thinking about the early 2000s now. That was nearly 20 years ago. Like, we're not that team anymore? Or is the value that people from that era provide still worth it? And I think that's something that Ferrari really need to weigh up in terms of what future direction they're going to take with their team.
Okay, let's have a kind of a closing remark from Freddie, who makes a really valid point, I guess, to maybe just the nature of human beings, and especially F1 fans, and especially F1 fans on Twitter. And I think he raises a really good point. So let's hear from Freddie.
I don't think Binotto should get the sack, because he was the technical director, the technical mind behind that, now we think, illegal Ferrari engine. But like, that's the mind that thought that was a loophole and found that and thought that was legal. So that's a technically pretty decent mind. And it would be a shame for Ferrari to lose that. I mean, he's been at the team since Schumacher's days, definitely. There's footage of that. So I'm a bit like, he's become a bit of a fall guy. He's become a bit of a villain with the whole Vettel situation, which is fair enough, because that was a bit unceremonious, to say the least. But I don't think he should be fired, and I think it would just cause a power vacuum in Ferrari and just cause more trouble if someone comes in. Then it would just make the PR life a little bit easier. Then the guy can just say, "Oh well, it wasn't me when I was there," and that's about it.
We love a scapegoat, don't we, Luke? We love pointing the blame at a singularity and going, that is the issue, and if we get rid of that, it will make all the problems go away. And of course it's Binotto, because he is the team principal and he has said bad things about Vettel, and how dare you ever say bad things about Vettel. But we get kind of swept up in it, don't we? And I think especially I guess it's difficult for fans looking in to maybe understand all of the machinations, really, of what's going on in a Formula One team. And, you know, myself included, like, I won't ever pretend to believe that I absolutely understand everything, or that we're told absolutely everything. That's more your guys' job when you're asking them the questions in these press conferences. And obviously they give you the PR response. So it's not something that we can always tell. But I guess what Freddie's maybe saying here is correct, in that, you know, what would they achieve by getting rid of Binotto, and who would they put in his place? Is that the solution? So how we're going to end the show today, Luke, is maybe just have a quick think about what we would do, because obviously, you know, we are the people with all the answers to every issue in Formula One ever. But like, if we were knowing what we know, regardless of how limited that information might be, what would you do to fix Ferrari?
Ooh, I would.
Big question, I know.
That is a big question. So personally, I would absolutely stick with Mattia Binotto as team principal. I think that the team that he is building, I think he still had to sort of undo a lot of stuff that was maybe done before he took over as team principal. And I think that even as much as I don't agree with Sebastian Vettel leaving that team, I think that Vettel is still sort of part of the pre-Binotto era at Ferrari in terms of him running that team. So therefore, he can sort of go into 2021 and say, look, Leclerc and Sainz, like, that's my first like proper me lineup that I decided on. And then I would stick with Binotto and give him that sort of regulation change for 2022 and say that is really the break point. Like, that is really where Ferrari can say that we can fight back, because right now nothing is going to change how they perform next year. Like, they are still going to be a long way off winning races next season, even maybe podiums next season. So therefore you've got to say, look, let's just write these 2 years off and start putting the building blocks in place for 2022. And I think a lot of it just comes down to just the technical restructuring. I think they've got to really try and invest in getting the best people in that team. And I mean, there's sort of rumours going around about what Andy Cowell, Mercedes engine guru, who obviously was so key to their success through this V6 hybrid era, what he's going to do next, because he's leaving Mercedes at the end of the year. If I was Ferrari, I would give him a blank check and say, look, just come in and just give us all your knowledge, like, do what you can with us. And I think they've got to do that in as many areas as possible and really try and build this super team. And I think that there are a lot of incredibly talented, incredibly passionate people at Ferrari, but as long as other teams are still forging ahead, are still pushing on, are still more successful, I think it is going to be really, really difficult for them to try and sort of make up that gap. So yeah, I think now is the time where they've really got to try and invest in the right people. Budget cap coming in as well. So I think that where the pecking order is, like, that's going to be set for sort of the early part of the budget cap era. Once these new regs come in 2022. I would just really sort of put everything on there. So I think that I agree that making another change, I don't think that'll be the answer, because I think we've seen with Domenicali going, with Mattiacci going, with Arriva Bene going, Ferrari still has not won a world championship. Like, they are still without a title, despite all those changes and despite all sort of what's been going on. And I think that you can give them so long, sure, but Binotto, I mean, he's not even had 2 seasons in the role. So I think that I would absolutely stick with him. I would say, let's look at sort of the deeper changes that need to be made in terms of the culture there as well. I think that's something that Binotto has worked on. And I think that if they can just really focus on making that speak to all areas of the team, then I think they'd have a good shout at turning things around once these new regs come in.
I think that's a lot. I think that's going to be a lot of people's deadline, isn't it? I think it's going to be there are a lot of teams waiting on that 2022 deadline in the hope that they can get at least somewhere closer to Mercedes. So I think that's a natural cutting off point, really. And whether that is 2023 rather than 2022, because obviously that's going to be the first season with the reg changes. And there's going to be a lot of instability, I think. It's going to be a lot of testing out these new regs and seeing where everybody plays out. But I do feel like that's going to be a natural cutting off point and going, right, we've given you this many years to get it right. You've not. So we need to look elsewhere. But what do you guys think at home? Do you agree? Do you think, having listened to this chat, are you still Binotto out or are you Binotto in? Let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments below where you stand. If you're watching or listening rather on your podcast players, then make sure that you are tweeting us either at Autosport or at Jess McF1 for myself and at Luke Smith F1 for Luke. That's it for today. It's all we've got time for as well. But make sure you're looking out for the next when we are prompting you to send in your opinions really to the topic that we've chosen each week. Thank you to everybody that sent in audio clips for this week's show. It's always brilliant going through what you guys think. It really gives us some good things to discuss. If you are listening on a podcast player, make sure you give us a rating, obviously 5 stars, because anything less is just doesn't exist really. No, I'm joking. Let us know what you think honestly about this show. What are the topics you'd like us to cover in future? And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe so that you never miss an Is It Just Me podcast. But until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.